I'll just quickly get to introduction to Kleber Antonio de Oliveira Amancio, who graduated in history from the Universidade Estadual de Campinas in 2006, has a master's in social history from the University of Sao Paulo, and a doctorate in social history from the University of Sao Paulo. He was a visiting scholar at Harvard University from 2014 to 2015. His principal area of research is the history of Brazil in the 19th and 20th century, as well as publications and themes related to the history of Campinas, Rio de Janeiro, slavery, abolition, post-abolition, literature, and the arts. Please welcome Kleber Amancio.
Good afternoon. In first place, I would like to say thank you for this invitation. I would like to thank Watson Institute, Professor James Green, Africana Studies Center for the Study of Slavery and Justice, and Mr. Ramon Stern, that was very kind and attentive when we scheduled this talk. I might to say that it's not a conclusive talk, since I'm still working on this research. However, I have some thoughts that I would like to share to advance in this debate, and here seems to me a great opportunity to do that. I will start this presentation in a common way. As you may know, in the last week, a social activist and councilwoman in Rio, Marielle Franco, was murdered in a cold blood. Marielle was back in home after attending an event during the afternoon about black women's empowerment. She was killed because she dares to fight against the genocide of black people. She does not hide them. She said clear and louder that Black Lives Matter, our lives matter. So I'd like to register this and dedicate my talk to her fight, to our fight. I believe that this event is, among other things, a place to think about how black bodies are treating diaspora, and the colonial discourse affects us until today daily, psychological and physically. So it's our duty to fight against this. Well, the history, as we know, is a science or a métier that tries to translate the past. We are faced with the problems of distance since we are foreigners. The historiographical narrative must necessarily be very similar. It must be created from documents examination. Historians have a long record of fondness for written sources, ignoring documents of another nature. I invite you to think about how these dynamics took place in the case of artworks. They were wasted for a long time, mostly appearing as illustration ipsis literis, losing sight of their potential to elucidate historical problems. The art has been historically established as an object of study from aesthetics since Baumgarten. At the same time, it was the raw material for a connoisseur art history, to a very specific way to understand art that concentrates on internal economy of the species, of the pictures, and the dynamic that they establish one each other. The situation has been changed since the 60s, when this field, the art history, especially in US and Great Britain, was transformed by a generation of academics who retracted the debate. Sivilena Alpers, Maya Shapiro, T.J. Clark, Michael Baxandall, and many others. Today, as consequence, we find more and more works that, among other contributions, recognize the particularities of art pieces. The nature of images, the visual thought, requires special tools and theoretical approach. However, the study of art does not necessarily have to be self-relational and detached from reality. Art is a vehicle to understand the society that produced it. This research is tributary of this new art history And in this talk, I will explore the different ways in which blacks have been represented in Brazilian art from 1637 to 1930. I select works that, hopefully, will help us to understand this diffuse and disarranged history. I understand that, juxtaposing these pieces, we could create a narrative line whose edges have been growing as much I advance in this investigation. This story tells about the artists who composed these images, their demands and convictions, but also talks about other aspects of that society. In many cases, the images speak about subjects that escape a consciously projected will. Art is important to construct identities, but also create stereotypes. This it may not be clear to a present-day observer, since we have experienced a process of vulgarization of images. I will propose an exercise so we can think about how these pictures affect us daily. I could mention, for example, the Black Panthers movie case, but I will be more specific and stick to something that is part of the Brazilian context. I'm going to describe 2 episodes that will help us to perceive the dimensions that the artistic manifestations can reach in certain contexts. February 11, 2018. The Samba School, Paraíso do Tuiuti, member of the Special Group of Rio, entered the Marquês de Sapucaí Avenue with the theme, my God, is slavery extinct? The parade recalls the 130 years of the Lei Áurea, the law that decreed the end of slavery in Brazil. In the next 60 minutes, an entertaining TV show exhibits much more than the usual show of Carnival, which combines music, dance, performance, visual arts, and etc. Few times in the history of Brazilian television, we see slavery, racism, social inequality, and black protagonists in such explicit way. A TV channel that years ago opened space for people defends the thesis that Brazil is not a racist country. The repercussion was immense in the social media. Tuiti's parade was trending topics of Twitter for a few days. The Comissão de Frente, which is a group of dancers who presents the school to the public, is called the Freedom Cry. This is one of the images of the Comissão de Frente. 14 strong black men, chained, closely monitored by an overseer who was ready to repress them if necessary. He was prepared to enforce the slave master's desires and to ensure that the captive bodies, which became private property in the New World, remained domesticated. At certain point, the repressor forces physically attack one of the enslaved, as you can see in this image. Immediately after that, all the malungos gather to the slave quarters. The group meets to assure a collective answer and seek redemption in the ancestors. Represented by a group of pretos velhos. Preto velho que contou, onde mora a senhora liberdade não tem ferro nem senhor. Black old man told us, where lives the lady liberty, has no iron or master, as elucidates the song lyrics. And from this dialogue with the ancestors, the enslaved remove the shackles from themselves. It's a very different idea from the one that we find in Vazante, a Brazilian movie awarded in many festivals around the globe last year. Since 2005, a Brazilian feature film did not represent slavery. Hollywood, as you may know, has produced, since Django, more than 14 titles that explore this subject. Daniela Thomas' movie shows its purpose in the first scene. Low camera in close-up, we see a lot of nude feet knead the mud of the road in middle of a torrential rain. First quadrupeds, then humans, until we are not able to distinguish them. The humans are in slaves. On the next sequence, we continue to see animals and people, both working. People have their faces covered by the shadows of their huge heads. It's not possible to individualize them. Further, we see black men with a naked torso. They are chained, heads down, trembling, feeling cold, ashamed, as if they could notice our presence. Actually, one of the actors looked to the camera, so this is very interesting. Cut. We see a delicate female feet. It's a young little white girl playing with the clay. Close up on her face, she closes her eyes, lifts her head, and smiles. This scene seems quite significant to me from this movie ethos. The slaves have no agency. The film documents a supposed process of acculturation, such as Florestan Fernandes, Ottaviani, Roger Bastide, Fernando Henrique Cardoso, and other intellectuals proposed in the 60s. The black movement in Brazil and part of the critics did not receive the film with open arms. The non-alignment with a posture sensitive to the current agenda of social movements that fight against the perpetuation of the structural racism in Brazilian society has been questioned. These two pieces are purposeful and has impact in the complex interaction that we are used to call reality. This imaginary is being disputed, although it's not an egalitarian relation. Both of this artistic manifestation build up the past with a visceral force. Hardly an academic paper would have this kind of impact. And just to clarify, I believe that academics articles have a place in this debate, otherwise I would not have written this text and we all will be spared from this exercise. The voices of resistance can be heard in different places: in social activism, in music, in dance, in contemporary visual arts, and even in daily practices that usually people do not recognize as a political act. There is resistance. From Rosana Paulino, whose works are the subject of a paper that I will present at Harvard next week, to Nego Fugido. This is one of the works of Rosana from the series Red Atlantic. To Nego Fugido. Nego Fugido is the name of a popular event that takes place in Acupe, a quilombo belonging to the city of Santo Amaro in Bahia. This happening mixes theater, performance, music, Afro-Brazilian religiosity, and slave memory. I could bring here today a small video about this manifestation, but I believe that's not possible to understand this situation if you are not in the moment right now, exactly. I understand that art is more than something that we can research. Art is a knowledge that can shape visions, break traditions, create stereotypes, or just promote the debate. Today I will speak about visual artworks, often oil paintings, watercolors, and drawings. Pictures of 100, 200, 300 years ago. Works that present problems that even today still affect our lives. Pictures that were produced in a context very different from ours. Pictures that helped to construct an imaginary about the black people in Brazil. Obviously, the visual arts are not the only media that fed this imaginary. However, looking at these images, it's possible to see continuities and changes. Not because works of art reflect reality, but because they create reality. They are subjects, not objects. They are built from a conjunction of ideas that mold the plastic form. The intentions of artists negotiated with society. For society, we can understand the mecena, the critics, or the public in general. The dialogues with tradition as continuity, overcoming, or rejection, but also the topics that escape from what is consciously projected. The pictures have questions, demands of their time, but in the long run, issues may surface. Kronos relentlessly disavows the narrow ritual arrangement designed for them. Prosaic passages become central, new proceedings arise, and what was essential it's not anymore. Analyzing a work of art, therefore, can be more than just recover the original attempts of the one who creates. After this brief prospect, let's move on to our first image. The picture presents a great panorama. The windy relief of Itamaracá Island gives rhythm to the passage, to the landscape. In the foreground, 4 men take center stage. 2 of them are white. They exhibit elegant robes, boots, shirt, vest, and pants, probably made of a noble fabric, and they have a pompous hat. The first one gives his back to us. His corpulence is a sign of distinction. He contemplates the island with enthusiasm, as his physique complexion suggests. The second one ignores the landscape. His body position indicates that he oversees the work of the black man. He watches them from the top of his horse. The black characters are half naked, wear simple clothes, ordinary as the work they do. The one on the right feeds the horse. They have no shoes. The boy on the left carries a sack on top of his head, balancing himself with effort and straightness. Contemplation is not allowed for them. The image that I just described is view of the Itamaracá Island, painted by Franz Post, a Dutch traveler who lives in Brazil, and at this time he was with the entourage of João Maurício de Nassau since 1637. The young Post, that has 24 years old at that time, was one of the official painters of that expedition. His task was to visually represent the landscape, the military acts, and the architecture built by Dutch in Brazil. He produced 18 pictures in the all 8 years that he remains in the country. View of Itamaracá Island is the first painting produced in the Americas, at least by a professional artist. Nassau's staff also included Albert Eckhout and Zacharias Wagner. It was an expedition with scientific purposes. This was one of the several expeditions promoted by European explorers interested in contact with the New World. Let's see another image produced in the same expedition, this time by Eckhout. Both the woman, described as an African in some works, and the child look at us back. They notice our presence with a slight smile that sounds more prominent in the boy's physiognomy. The woman's tattooed skin contrasts with her robes, saturated with an intense red and the formally symmetrical pattern. The boy has a less dark complexion and lighter eyes. They have no shoes. Judging by the physics similarity, they are mother and son. She is a strong woman. Well-defined muscles indicate the demands of her job. The parrot and corn by the hand of the boy, the tropical fruits in the basket offered by the woman suggest that we are looking to some place in America. In the background, black men, also enslaved, are working. Almost out of our radar, a bunch of ships from the Dutch squadron complete the scene. Scientific expeditions have advanced over the next centuries, and Johann Moritz Hugendas is probably the most famous artist who participated of this enterprise. Hugendas' work flirts with anthropology. As describes Robert Slens, the historian, he knows the ethnographic golden map that he was seeing in Brazil. The German painter knew that once in Brazil, there was a possibility of observing a large number of African ethnic groups because of the peculiarities that involved the Atlantic slave trade. He was in Brazil for 3 years, from 1822 to 1825, and painted emblematic pictures. Black Slave Ship is probably the most recognized work. Hugendas portrays the horror, the same that Kurtz describes in Heart of Darkness. It's the horror of the colonial agenda. It's the horror of the advance of imperialism. We spotted a mass of people in the basement of a ship, a slave ship. 32 imprisoned men, women, and children, and 3 slave traders occupying the tiny space. The environment is dark and unhealthy. They are mostly naked, chained like animals. The artists explore the assorted reactions. In the upper left corner, a man supports his chin with his hand, presents a condescending face. Further down, another man shrinks because of the cold. In the center, another elderly man is comforted by a young man. In the right corner, a young man is carried by 2 of the traffickers. The first one points to the place where they should drop his body, while another one illuminates the darkness with a lamp, allowing a woman to watch the scene. She's in shock. Hugendas accentuated the distinctions between the ethnic groups. We can see how he explores the bone differences in the faces and also ethnic signs such as hairstyles and scarifications. Hugendas record their customs. Among his watercolors, we can highlight the one that portrays capoeira. His impression takes on a more playful tone than in the palette of another painter-traveler, the English Augustus Earle. Wool's design highlights the aspects of the transgression and attentive eyes of the state, synthesized by the figure of the policeman. In Hugendas prevail the particularities of this dense fight. It's clear to the viewer a supposed duplicity, especially to an observer who is not part of that world and tries to interpret it using categories that make sense in his own culture. Hugendas left Langsdorff mission and was replaced by Aimé Adrien Antonet and Hercule Florence. The first was a painter, son of Nicolas Antoine Antonet, a member of the French artistic mission. Just to clarify, in 1816, a group of French artists created the National School of Fine Arts in Rio. This occurred with the announce of the king, Dom João VI, that support this mission. Hercule Florence was a designer, a polygraph, and a photographer. They are artists with different styles. However, they share an interest in slavery and everything that surrounds this system. In this image, we can see a palm tree and parrots indicated that the portrayed microcosm is in the tropics. A couple of masters are protected inside the wagon. An energetic and suspicious overseer supervises the slaves. We don't see those faces, or even know why and where they are going. They just walk mechanically, they are slave things. The almost abstract silhouette merges with nature. In the watercolor of our next image. In the watercolor of Hercule Florence, we notice the influence of photography. The farm gains tones closer to this language. It functions as the element that shapes the existence of those characters. The slaves are not accompanied by anyone. Again, it's not possible to individualize the characters. Among the painters that were members of French artistic mission, the one who was best known for painting the daily lives of the slaves was Jean Baptiste Debret. Debret, that was cousin of the great Jacques-Louis David, is one of the great icons that materialized this period in watercolors. It is not exaggeration to propose that his work accommodate the visual culture of slavery in Brazil. When slavery appears in school history books, there is his images. We can discuss how these publications use these images, but this is a theme to another talk. I selected two works of these artists to explore. In the first one, we are facing a scene with multiple actors. Small narratives converge to the main subject, the public punishment of slaves. The black body exposed into the entire picture. The slaves, clearly disturbed, watch the ritual in an apprehensive way. It has a pedagogical function. The story has three moments. A slave is brought to be punished. Naturally, he's reluctant, but it does not matter. He's dragged by an agent of the state and by another terrified slave. He had his hand and feet tied. In the center, another captive is penalized, another slave. He's whipped with vigor. His look are fixed on no concrete point. His facial expression announces a deep pain. Another slave who has passed through punishment wriggles. He has a problem to getting up. Another fellow aids him, attentive to his owner's reaction. He is acting under the master's supervision. His body obeys and satisfies the master's desires. One more time, we have a counterpoint to Earl. This time, Augustus Earl creates a tough painting. The event has considerable smaller dimensions. Only the slaves and the man who is about to be punished is sympathetic to suffering of his fellow captive. The other characters, white and black, are indifferent to this. The second image that I selected is also quite shocking. There is an urban scene whose characters are the master and his slave. The black one protects his owner's skin with an umbrella, while he urinates in a wall in broad daylight. Between day two, there is a horse that gives him some little privacy. The slave stands on his toes to accomplish his function. The effort to balance himself makes his feet take a terrible resemblance to the horse's paw. The image of Debret were intended to form a picturesque and historical narrative. There is, therefore, a very different motivation from the scientific impetus we have seen previously. In addition, his visual works were accompanied by texts that, in some cases, did not agree with the drawings. What aspect these images have in common? They present European visions about the New World. Besides the difference of style in proposition, they share a common ground. Blacks are represented as fundamental agents of societies based on slave labor. However, only as subordinated characters or even as objects, anonymous bodies with no voice. The artistic traditions on which the painters dialogue, the audience and their mental universe are aspects that shaped these views. They have the power to describe the others based in your own culture and paradigms. Even when the idea is denouncing the cruelty and injustice of the slavery system, the painters only can see the other with his own lenses. They speak mainly of themselves. These observations serve for another painters who have passed through Brazil. Nicolas Antoine Tonet. This is Vista do Outoeiro, Praia e Igreja da Glória. Thomas Ender, com Vista do Rio. Maria Graham, com Mercado de Escravos. Henri Chamberlain, com Quitandeiras na Lapa. E Eduard Hildenbrand, com Paisagens com Negros. Now let's explore other situations in what blacks appears in Brazilian paintings. For example, the portraits. Portraits, it's a mean that people use to perpetuate their own image for the next generations. This genre was, for much time, reserved for wealthier families or, in special cases, to characters that had heroic attitudes. This is the case of Intrepid Marinheiro Simão, by José Correia de Lima. Simão was a real character from Cabo Verde. He was a free sailor. He saved about a dozen people that were in a steam ship in 1853. Correia de Lima was a pupil of Debret and one of the first students to be formed by the Imperial Academy of Fine Arts. The picture shows the bust of Simão. The background is dark and opaque. There is no scenario. What matters is just Simão's figure, the nautic hope that tells your job. There is a frontal illumination on his face that exposes his satisfied feature. This was one of the rare portraits of black people we can find in the 19th century Brazil. I just have make a break because I have a problem with my computer. Just a sec. Sorry. I just reinitializing because his Sorry about that. Simão was a real character from Cabo Verde. He was a free sailor. He saved about a dozen people that were in a steamship in 1853. Correia de Lima was a pupil of Debret and one of the first students to be formed by the Imperial Academy of Fine Arts. The picture shows the bust of Simão. The background is dark and opaque. There is no scenario. What matters is just Simão's figure. The nautical ropes tell us your job. There is a frontal illumination on his face that exposes his satisfied feature. This was one of the rare portraits of black people we can find in 19th century Brazil. There's another one, very interesting, called Retrato de Baiana. This is an intriguing figure. We do not know the exact date of his production, just that it's from 19th century. We have in this case an exceptionality instigating character. A black woman dressed in sumptuous clothes, a well-cut dress, lush jewels. Who is this character? Why did they portray her? These are questions that still remains with no answers. Renata Bittencourt made a dissertation about this work. She considered the hypothesis of the image was produced by a black brotherhood to be seen by blacks, according to her. The portrait of Baiana wears this black woman, not only in woman's clothes, as was the habit of slaves and freedmen, not only with Creole or African probes. Already seeing their dimension of exotism in various contexts. The dressing, in this case, is more a coat of dignity that seems to exhale from the intentions of self-representation of the person portrayed. His pose and mode of presentation seek to fix his image according to laudable standards and legitimized by the group she's belonging. Renata bets on the agents of these subjects. It's important to note that in the second half of the 19th century, with the popularization of photography, black freedmen start to use this service to perpetuate their images. Besides the portraits, we have some pictures that I call iconography of abolition. They are paintings mainly commissioned by the state. They are created because the government needs to disseminate this vision over a historical fact to promote a narrative line according with their interest. In the abolition of slavery of Victor Meirelles, the moment when the Princess Isabel signs the Lei Áurea was elected to be immortalized. In the center of the picture, we can see the princess surrounded by representative members of the upper classes. The pomp of the costume, combined with the robustness of her gestures, makes this picture almost a sacred solemnity. We witnessed beneficent feelings of the redemptive princess, who is elevated by an altar. In the limit of our visual field, we see some characters waving their hats. Where are the blacks? This silence means a lot. Show us that what vision intends to be promoted. In Lei Áurea, Miguel Navarro y Cañizares rationalize through a triangular structure the weight of each one of the actors who supposedly made this event. Congressmen and military. Each group occupies one side of the picture. In the center, raised by an altar, Once more, the princess clings to a cross, protected by divine figures. At her feet are three poor women. Two of these women are black. Her gestures reveal that they are truly moved by the act, especially the child that represents the future. This picture establishes relationships with Alegoria of the Lei do Ventre Livre, that means the free belly law. This is a reference to the free belly law in the Lei Áurea picture. That's the date of the law, that's 1871. In this canvas, Cañizares repeats the idea of concession, the outstanding presence of the church and the state. The slaves, once again, are grateful in a situation of inferiority, and they prove from the indifference of the man actor to his existence. Here's a detail of the picture, in what we can see the black woman be grateful to this gift. We have another pictures of that presents the abolitional law, but none of them has presents the slaves as real characters, né? As the first picture we saw first, this image that do not show voice or agents from slaves. They are just grateful. The decisions was made by imperial governments and the church will. There is nothing minimally resembling the Tree Battle of Palm Tree of January Suchodolski, the painting that was symbol of the Haitian Revolution. It's important to remember that after the Malaise Revolt in 1835, a period of strong repression was established in Brazil. It's not surprising that these paintings that speak about emancipation emphasize values that go through the human evolution of the masters and has nothing to do with the pressure of the abolitionist movement of the slave riot or the slavery riots. I understand that the big difference of the paintings made by the travelers was the political motivation. In this case, there is a clear purpose to tell an official history, a history with no fight, resistance, and blood. There is a picture produced in 1888 that displays the place that blacks must occupy in this narrative. This is Independência ou Morte from Pedro Américo. At the center, the protagonist, Dom Pedro I, the new emperor, and a group of followers are in the center of the picture. They are located on a higher part of their terrain. The painting clarifies a salutary event for national history. It's the independence of Brazil. We became eyewitnesses of the exactly moment when the independence of the country was proclaimed. The monarch's pose is heroic. Raise the sword toward the heavens. He is haughty and diplomatic in the same measure. His horse is the only animal that is resting. He says to the world that Brazil is not be submissive to the Portuguese crown. His companions, slightly more agitated, agree with him. The thing in this canvas is that we do not have basically black people in this history. We are talking about the creation of the fundamental piece that shows the Brazil just became an independent country, and we have just one black character. This one. Where are the black people? Where are they on the picture? After all, they made up a significant percentage of the population. How it's possible to exclude them from that process? As we can note, the black presence on the screen is perfectly residual. The only black character is a passerby located in the left portion of the picture. In the background rides a donkey. The character is completely oblivious to the situation. Not even is a bystander. He's busy working. They have no place or time to be part of the birth of this country. However, in few years, a picture will discuss the place that blacks must occupy in the country. The picture is A Redenção de Cam, made by Modesto Brocos, a Spanish painter that made his career in Brazil. It still is a subject of intense debate even today. It's a painting that supposedly documents the miscegenation process in Brazil. At least was the way of João Batista Pereira Borges used this image in the first Universal Congress of Races in 1911. We have at one side of the picture a black lady, her daughter with lighter skin, holding up a child in her arms. On the right side, we see a white man, or maybe a caipira. I don't know how to translate to English. The old woman thanks to heavens to the whitening of her grandson. This painting agrees with the policies that Brazilian states take after the abolition period. Despite Brazil do not have a historical record of race laws, has a bunch of laws that was made to clearly attack black population. These appear during the Congress debates and in the daily practices. This canvas has a thesis. There's no place to a slave past in modern Brazil. In the same period, he has a group of painters who was concerned to think the everyday life in big cities. They painted the marginalization and the process of gentrification, and they were concerned in explore this process of transformation of the country after slavery. I choose some pictures to look, so let's look to Carlos Chamberlain picture that's called Young Lady with Fruits. It's a scene that takes places in an internal domestic environment. The character who gives the title to the screen is a young black woman with very short hair. She holds a silver tray with various fruits, apples, oranges, and bananas. She wears a uniform, which implies that she is a cook or a maid. She grabs the tray while attentively looks the other way, to something that is not allowed to us to see. On the wall, we see two works of art, part of a draw that we cannot identify, and a small figure that shows a white woman contemplating the horizon. We can relate this painting with Cleaning Up Metals by Armando Viana. It's assumed that the character is an employee and not a owner because she is cleaning up the silver in simple clothes that do not match with the elaboration of the pieces. The rosy shade of the dress recommends a docile femininity. The girl's body language, however, it's intriguing. The hands work, but the brain is in somewhere else. As she cleans the pieces, she's the act of cleaning seems to be mechanically. She's visible, uncomfortable, in it's bored, just like this character in Manet's picture, Abaro ou Folie Bergeret. Is a critical look to the marginalizing modernity. Finally, I would like to end my talk talking about two portraits of black artists that for me shows that is in the first time thinking the presence of blacks in Brazilian painting and treating them like real characters. So finally, I would like to talk about the paintings made by black artists, in my opinion, are a counterpoint in this story. I'm not saying that black determines their work, but certainly has affected this discourse. Not because they have some innate characteristic, but because their bodies are affected in diaspora daily. Anyway, as I made until now, I will continue to look to the pictures, to their internal economies, as a starting point. So, to finalize my talk, I would like to look at two portraits. The first one is Head of a Man by Rafael Pinto Bandeira. It's apparently a very prosaic painting. We face the bust of a man. There is nothing in the background that distracts us from him. His face emerges from the shadows. His head is slightly tilted to the left. He does not look at us. Actually, it's not possible to say that, indeed, he's looking at something. It seems to have an internal activity that escapes our possibilities of analysis. It may seem like a simple painting, but from the simplicity, it's that its strength emerges. It has relevant similarities with another portrait, this time by Arthur Timotheo da Costa. First of all, let's look at what a journalist say when he's reporting some impressions about this picture. Retrato de Preto is another painting made by Timotheo da Costa and one of the best of this exhibition. As the title says, it represents a black, flat-nosed and red lips, sucking on a cigarette. The artist admirably caught the expression of the black of Rio, expression of audacity and very capping of the 13th of May. Is this the enemy of the Argentine? The reference to the Argentine enemy is probably something related to urban reform that Rio was doing in this period. There is a passage by the writer Lima Barreto, a black writer of Rio of this period, that illuminates such aspect. Lima Barreto says, the obsession of Buenos Aires has always disturbed our judgment. The big city of Prata has 1 million inhabitants. The Argentine capital has long straight streets. The capital of Argentina has no blacks. Therefore, my lords, Rio must cut your mountains and have a wide, straight streets. Rio, a country of 3 or 4 large cities, must have 1 million. Rio, capital of the country, has received 1 million of blacks for almost 3 centuries, should not have blacks. The Rio is being civilized, has to be civilized. The writer's tone offers the measure of what this project was about. It's not a coincidence that in July of 1888, a few months after the Lei Áurea, a discussion gained importance in the Congress, the creation of mechanisms to control the work and the workers after slavery. That is the theme of Timotheo da Costa's picture. The character represented is not exactly a type, but a 13 May, a very pejorative way to say former slavery. Timotheo portrays a very common real character. He's not rich, as you can perceive, looking to his simple clothes, or even seems to have made something exceptional. He's just smoking a cigar and look at us. He's challenges the bourgeois that will see him in a pompous saloon. He's not working, posing, or even representing a type that fits in categories that reduce his existence. He's a former slave that just recovers his humanity by the law. He fits green and yellow clothes that certainly are reference to the country's flags. Timotheo is a portrait that Brazilian bourgeoisie tries to hide them. We have often learned that modernist painters were the first to include black effectively in a big national narrative. I particularly disagree with this argument. My point of view, these paintings do not do that. Blacks appear mostly as part of the narrative, but not effectively as subjects. They represent some ideas that, more than interpret reality, project a very specific and exotic place to them. In many cases, they try to show up the peculiarities of Brazil, without look to these characters as real subjects. They appear as part of a major national identity forging endeavor. Arthur Timotheo da Costa, Rafael Pinto Bandeira, and many others were more concerned with the agents of his characters, and his work is a way to, among other things, struggle with stereotypes and reclaim a place to black people in this racist society. Thank you.
If you want to field any questions that anyone has.
Sure.
So, thank you very much for your talk. It's very interesting. And one of the things I've noticed, especially when looking at some of the earlier pieces, I saw similarities in the graphic depiction of blacks in Brazil. I saw a lot of similarities with that, with depictions you see of people in the Orient at the same time, or at a similar time. And so I'm wondering, to what extent do you think that Orientalism and the way that blacks in Brazil are depicted in Brazil with artists creating work in Brazil, to what extent do you think those are kind of intertwined and related, and to what extent do you think maybe this is a different phenomenon?
Sorry, you were asking if has a connection between Orientalism and the pictures that Europeans made in Brazil, right? I believe it's very similar because actually one of these artists passed through, for example, Brazil, Mexico, and other countries, and they present a very similar way to represent. So I believe it's, even when they are not, how to say that, for example, Rugendas, that was an abolitionist, he has a very specific way to look to these characters that I believe that has to be with the treating, the training that they have in the European schools of art. So I believe I can see some connections, but I never studied these representations more profoundly in Asia, but I believe you're right, has some connections. More questions? Please.
Did Diego Rivera ever visit Brazil? And independent of whether he did or not, I noticed that you didn't show any murals, whatever. Was there any examples of mural art in Brazil in the early 20th century?
Mural works, I do not
That
understand.
would depict Africans in Brazil.
Sorry, I do not understand, I believe.
O muralismo do Diego Rivera.
Muralismo,
se
sorry.
ele visitou
Okay.
primeiro e se teve algum tipo de arte muralista, de murais
Okay,
que
okay.
representava o
Muralism.
Brasil.
Okay, we have a muralism, but just in the modernist artists made this. I choose to not show the modernist arts here because in Brazil we have an idea that this guy, for example, I did my PhD about Arthur Timotheo da Costa. He's a Black Panther. And basically he do not exist to this bibliography. So I politically was thinking show what these guys made before the modernist artists. But we have a specific guy called Portinari that made some murals. But it's funny because 2 days ago was in Mexico for the first time, and I could see that murals that Diego Rivera did, and I was thinking that we do not have something similar in Brazil. The blacks are not part of this narrative that just with the modernist arts disappear in a way that we can compare, but I don't know if I respond to you.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Guys, sorry about my English. I was a little bit nervous, so I commit a lot of mistakes. Please.
Yeah, I wanted to thank you for your talk. I really enjoyed and I really appreciate that you acknowledge the theme of Maria Franco for the opening. And I don't know if you're going to be here tomorrow, but I wanted to let you know that there's going to be visuals or an event to acknowledge her after that tomorrow at 12. The main green, which is the big green area here around. So
nice.
if you're still around, it would be wonderful to have you there. People are going to be reading poetry, reflecting on the effects of her.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys. Any questions? Okay. Thank you very much for the invitation and for the opportunity of show my work here.